In this video you may need sunglasses because I'm testing a 1999 Ford Focus Millennium Edition. That really is bright, isn't it? So the Ford Focus is one of the more interesting Fords, I would say. This is the car that they launched to counter criticism of the final Escort, the Mark V Escort. Was not very well received, I don't think, and I think the Mark VI was better, but still some way off the pace. Where the Escort was frumpy and a bit the Focus is definitely not. It uses Ford's new edge design language, shared with my Australian Ford Fairmont here. So there are curves and lines in places you don't expect. There's a triangle theme which continues both inside and outside the car. This car's on Ford Puma alloy wheels, which the owner prefers because they're a bit easier to look after. But they were all, these Millenniums, this bright yellow colour. The trim level is effectively gear, but it's the 1.8 litre petrol engine, the Zetec engine, which is, I think, is 115 brake horsepower. And a lot of the detail under the skin is what makes these cars interesting. It's fitting I'm testing this car in South Wales because the engineer largely responsible for this car was Richard Parry-Jones. Hugely important in the history of Ford and in turning their fortunes around. He was very prolific. He was at Ford from the late 1960s. At one stage he ran the Cologne factory in Germany, and later on he was the man responsible for designing this car, which is very different in many ways. Now, one of the most important things Parry-Jones did with the Focus was give it control blade rear suspension, which is a very marketing way of saying independent rear suspension. It cost Ford about an extra $50 per car, but Parry-Jones managed to make the case for it, saying it would be better than the competition. Twist beam suspension tended to be the way rear suspension was done, just simple, cost effective. But Parry-Jones reckoned the extra expense was worth it to give this car a fully independent rear suspension with benefits for ride and handling. And that worked. The press response to this car was extraordinary. I think a little overblown myself. It's a good car, but the press went absolutely nuts for the Focus back in the day. The styling, which is so edgy and controversial, you just got lines all over the place. It somehow works and comes together on the Focus, and I think it is really a very handsome design. I think the later facelift was actually even better when they tucked the indicators into the headlamp and just smoothed out the front end. A very, very minor facelift indeed. The Focus came out in 1998 and it sort of refreshed the standard for this market sector. The Volkswagen Golf probably had the edge in terms of interior solidity and perhaps in NVH, but when it came to ride and handling, the Focus was said to be the pick of the lot. Now, this car is no museum piece. It's covered 186,000 miles, so you have to excuse the odd rusty scab here and there. But here is the engine, the Zetec engine, new range of twin cam 4-cylinder engines for Ford, but I think came in the Escort as a bit of a hasty redevelopment to try and improve that car. Expansion tank here. We've got air conditioning because this is a top of the range model, and I'm really not sure what else to say. I mean, at least we can kind of see the engine. Obviously cross flow exhaust this side, intake at the back, and McPherson strut front suspension. First use on Fords in the early 1950s. So yeah, there you go, there's an engine. Moving inside, we just check the door. That's a nice door shut going on, and we get leather interior as part of this Millennium specification. I'm not a fan of leather. I think it's not actually luxurious. I think it's a pain and makes you slide around in your seat an awful lot. But we see that triangle design theme continues inside here. Even the random angles on the steering wheel, this one's got a cover on it because the leather that would have been standard has degraded somewhat. In the 186,000 miles this car has covered, this hasn't degraded that badly. These always did that. I've driven Foci with far fewer miles on and had just as worn a gear knob. The owner has added some yellow trim to try and brighten things up in here a bit, but otherwise this is largely stock. We've even got the build number. They made 1,000 Millenniums and this one is number 543. But if I put the ignition on, I really like the way they've done that. I think that's a carryover from the Escort to have these circular warning lights around the edge, and I think that works really nicely actually. So I quite like that feature. Got stubby little stalks, very, very Ford, which leads us to one of the biggest problems of the Ford Focus that I will demonstrate now. And that is this whopping triangle of doom. Look at that. Thankfully the washers are adjusted quite nicely, so it's not dribbling just yet, but they do that, and it's very, very irritating. Now the driving position is actually quite high up. Parry Jones says that the reason he was drawn to this design for the car was that it's quite high but disguises it well, and that means the seating position is quite high up. We look at the distance between seat base and floor, it's kind of approaching that MPV feel, and I really like that. I like if you're using a car every day, you want a car where you haven't got to drop down too much to sit in the seat, and that is certainly the case here. But all the controls fall nicely to hand. We've got the indicators, sorry, hazard warning lights there. I do hate that noise, a fake indicator noise. It's cringy, but a really nice stereo. Ford stereos were actually really good at this time, and we've got aircon. We've also got the front and rear heated windows. Ford patented the heated windscreen technology. It's just basically finer wires than the hefty ones used in the back. Sad to report the rear wiper doesn't work on this model. He's replaced it with a HubNut sticker. I don't know if that works as well. But yeah, it's quite nice in here. There are obviously a few trim issues. There's a few self-tappers chucked in to hold things together. But generally, I don't think this is holding up too badly for its 186,000 miles. What's it like in the back? Well, I'll tell you. If you jump aboard, again, the seat feels reassuringly high. It's a bit tight for headroom for me. That's the downside of having such a high seating position, I guess. But it's comfortable enough. I've got plenty of knee room. We've got some nice storage pockets here. Decent size on the side windows as well. So yeah, it's quite pleasant here. Got centre armrest as well, so that's good. 60/40 split rear seat. Moving on to the boot, remote release and all that. Oh yeah, look at that. That is a good size of boot. And there's a handy pointing stick, so I can point at the intrusion here of the wheel arches. Not actually too bad, I don't think. The smaller part of the 60/40 split rear seat. I believe there is a full-size spare wheel under here. And we've got screwdrivers, just in case we need to screw any bits of interior back together in. And a quick shout out to the Ford South Wales fanatics. Obviously the owner is a member of said club. So yeah, this is an interesting area, I think, but quite bulky. But then if you had the tailgate going out there, I think it would look quite weird. But yeah, that's a good sized boot, I would say. Okay then, on to the driving bit. I will say the NVH levels don't seem perfect on this example. The engine is quite boomy. I don't know if there's an engine mount down. 186,000 miles, we can forgive it the odd foible, I think. But importantly, a very simple car to drive. Parry Jones was a fan of what he called the 50-meter test, and he knew, rather he was actually apparently influenced by Sir Jackie Stewart, the noted racing driver. But the most important part of a car is how you feel when you get in it and set off for a drive. And it's not how well the car handles on the limit. That's not important. I mean, it's an element you need to be aware of, but it's not the most important thing. It's get in the car, take it for a short drive. How do you feel about it? And I think a lot of thought went into that. And that's why I think this car is an awful lot better than, say, the Mazda 323F. I used to own one, and that car was amazing on the twisty road when you're absolutely going for it. But the rest of the time, it was crashy, the seats were uncomfortable, and the ride was terrible. I don't think this is the most composed ride, but again, we've got 186,000 miles on this example, so it's not in the first flush of youth. But it isn't painful. It rides well enough. So yeah, I think Parry Jones did an excellent job. Sadly, Parry Jones did pass away this year, and that's a shame, although he stopped working for Ford in 2008, I think it was. but I think he will be forever remembered for these early noughties Fords, like the Ford Puma, which I will be driving very soon in another video. There's a few trim rattles here and there, which certainly sets it apart from, say, a Volkswagen, but in terms of driving dynamics, this is probably better. Oh, these humps are going to hurt. I can't avoid going like that. There we go. That wasn't too bad, actually. Haha! National speed limit. Oh, 60, there we go. Yeah, it's a good amount of punch with the 1.8 litre engine. There is a bit more noise than is perhaps ideal, road and wind, but it feels like a great mile munching car, which is important for the fleet buyers. An awful lot of these cars would have seen plenty of motorway action. Oh yeah, turn it. Oh, very quick steering. Yeah, that's nicely direct. Yeah, that's a very likable behaviour. It feels very keen and eager to dive into a bend. The steering's also really nicely weighted, and the visibility is really good as well, even though the rear window is fairly small. And certainly looks it in the design when you're outside. Yeah, it feels nimble and sure-footed. I would say the ride isn't quite as good as I want it to be. Perhaps that's because I'm a Citroen owner, so I'm used to a little more ride comfort, not necessarily at the cost of handling. But actually, what really set the wheels in motion for the improvements of riding handling in this class, I think it's the Peugeot 306 and the Citroen ZX, which are both truly excellent. Unfortunately, Peugeot rather took their eye off the ball and replaced the 306 with a rather dumpy 307. So the Focus had that as a rival instead, and yeah, I think the Focus was leagues ahead of the 307. But yeah, I mean, the handling is just lovely. It just feels really competent. Maybe the handling's so good precisely because Parry Jones would have grown up on roads such as these. When you're finished having fun, just drop a couple of gears, and yeah, it's nice and relaxing. So it isn't just a one-trick pony. The Mazda 323F, the Nissan Primera I owned fairly recently. Oh my gosh, those cars are amazing on the limit. Or not even necessarily on the limit, just fun to drive quickly, really good, very sharp handling, but it comes at the cost of so much else. You don't always want a race car. If you always wanted that sports car vibe, you would buy a sports car. This is a much better balance. This is really competent and sharp when you want it to be, but it's relaxing when you want to ease off a bit. Unfortunately for me, I like driving like this. And there's so much more enjoyment to be had, I think. Oh, look out. A whole load of sheep. From driving a good, competent car quickly than an out-and-out sports car. That's a lot of purple sheep. Yeah, I can see what the fuss was all about. So that was the Ford Focus, a Ford I've driven, and I actually really liked it. I don't dislike Fords. I have a reputation for disliking Fords. I think because I was quite harsh on the Mark 6 Escort. But the Escorts, the last of the Escorts, weren't good enough. This car was. This is what Ford is capable of, and it's just a shame it took so long for them to get up on their game again. That is an absolutely cracking family car. It's fun when you want it to be. It's just very comfortable and competent when you don't. No, maybe the ride is a bit too firm and the interior build quality is still not perfect, but then that's true of a lot of its rivals as well. The Astras, the Peugeot, Citroens, you know, better ride, worse interior trim. you know, everything's a battle. Each car has its own compromises, but overall, a very, very good package. I'm responsible for a big turnaround in Ford's fortunes, I feel, because this car was edgy and stylish, and it attracted a new world of buyers to the Ford badge. So yeah, very important, very competent. I hope you've enjoyed that. Don't forget you can head to the store and buy lovely merchandise. I shall see you in a future video. Farewell. Oops. There we go. That's better, isn't it?